Hello, this is Robert Mutai, your teacher through analysis of Fathers of Nations, a novel written by Paul B. Veiter. And this is the cover of the book entitled Fathers of Nations, a book by Paul B. Veiter, the publisher, Oxford. You can reach me through eruditescholar2@gmail.com or brothermtai@gmail.com. And this is my telephone number. I'm your teacher, Robert Mutai. Without much ado, a recap of the last lesson. We saw Fathers of Nations and appropriateness of the title. And we simply said Fathers of Nations means male leaders of countries. And this is in the African context. Although Fathers of Nations is a honorific or a respectful title given to the founders of national democracies, in Africa it refers to a different story. It means dictators, it means manipulators, it means people who are visionless and directionless. And these are not all people, but particularly the male persons who occupy position of authority. Let's continue today by looking at the plot summary or the synopsis. This story, Fathers of Nations, is a spellbinding and thought-provoking satirical novel tackling contemporary issues set in contemporary Africa. Paul B. Veiter uses sarcasm through humor to enlighten the reader on the socio-economic and political wrongs in the African states. The continent is still struggling with the post-independence problems, and these are poverty, ignorance, and disease. And instead of these Fathers of Nations concentrating on solving these problems, the nations have new entrants which are equally retrogressive to the inhabitants or the citizens of the African nations. And the new problems emerging in the continent due to poor leadership by the Fathers of Nations include corruption and impunity. The continent is therefore depicted as having lost a sense of direction and moral correctness. The structure of the story revolves around the lives of four men from different parts of Africa. And these men are Professor Kimani, Comrade Melusi, Engineer Tahir, and Pastor Chineke Chiemaka, who all want African heads of state in a summit to adopt into law a document that could transform the continent's economic structures. The above stated four men, otherwise referred to in the opening sentences of the first chapter as four strangers, have initially suffered in different ways in their countries under the current political systems and their presidents in their respective countries. And this makes each one of them to hold a grudge against the same systems that affected them, and therefore they start to press for possible change. Dr. Abiola Afolabi is left by his American wife in a divorce. She is called Pamela. Professor Kimani from Kenya has lost his wife Asia Omondi to a former university colleague, now a politician by the name Newborn Walomu MP. His daughter Tuni dies in a fatal road accident. Pastor Chineke Chiemaka is a fiery man who is jailed irregularly and also stopped from preaching. And finally, the fourth man, we have this man called Ngobile Melusi Comrade, a big-time politician who suffers in the hands of the new head of state. He loses his wife Zeliza in a massacre, and his Ndebele people are ruthlessly suppressed and murdered by the head of state's direct order. In addition to the foreman, we have a man called Engineer Saif Tahir, a nuclear bomb expert who took his studies in one of the best universities in France. And also we have a man called Mr. Thaddeus Longway, who is a white South African, who are all together dissatisfied by the African leadership. And they are assisted by a foreign media house called VOA, Voice of America, that has just hired an African-based journalist called Fiona Mackenzie and a technocrat called Nicholas Sentinel, who in one agreement plan and front the agenda before the heads of summit held in the Gambian capital of Banjul. And the agenda is to propose and endorse Path Alpha against the intentions of the leaders to adopt Way Omega. So the meeting of heads of state is planned to take place in Banjul, the capital of Gambia. 50 heads of state are invited, including the Gambian head of state. He's supposed to be the chair and the host of the summit, but he prefers to hand over this responsibility to another president. We are told in the story that he does not want his country to take the hit for a failed meeting, so he takes the position of a visitor and decides to choose a more neutral person in coming to the Gambia to chair the summit. So the heads of state are assembled and accommodated in the Pinnacle Hotel with their entourage. They look forward to readopt Way Omega ideology, which advocates for a common growth strategy of the citizens, which will enable the donors, that is the Western countries, to continue giving loans, that is support the African nations through loans, that is aids and grants. And this is going to enslave the continent. And the ideology is fronted, or it is actually proposed by Minister Zinto, who represents the development ministers who advise the African heads of state to come to the Gambia to adopt Way Omega. And Zinto claims that the strategy was well thought out by experts, and the experts in the story are the 20 Nobel laureates. The majority of the African heads of state, they appear to be very old, and also they have overstayed in power. And a good example is a president among the 50 called Didier Bengura, who is portrayed in the story as senile, that is very old and has lost ability to think clearly. We also have another one called Bibo Dibonso, who has ruled for 40 years as at the time of the story. You can take your time, you can pause this video and refer to this story in page 157 of the novel Fathers of Nations. We also have King Jemba Jemba the fourth, who is a king for life. He cannot be removed from authority unless he dies, and even if he did, his son or next of kin would rule in his position. We also have President Wasiwasi, who has committed all sorts of political illegalities, including authoring many coups and so many others. The Path Alpha ideology is a counter-ideology originating from AGDA. AGDA is Agency for Governance and Development in Africa, which is championed by Mr. Thaddeus Longway, otherwise known as Tad Longway. And this ideology, Path Alpha, is actually introduced into the Heads of State Summit. Mr. Longway mobilizes the likes of Professor Kimani, Comrade Milusi, Pastor Chiamaka Chineke, Dr. Abiola Afolabi, and Engineer Tahir to use the trick to table the ideology before the summit to counter the Way Omega. So the four strangers who arrived at the Banjul, at the Gambia in Banjul, they have come to oppose the intentions of the heads of state to adopt Way Omega. They are coming to front Path Alpha ideology as a rival document. So Path Alpha is a strategy that advocates for mobilizing civic or public dissatisfaction into the will to change. This strategy is to solve the problems some present heads of state find it difficult to deal with. The advocates of Path Alpha, they champion the strategy because they want to solve the problems owing to the fact that they have also suffered the ugly state abuse and do not want to suffer anymore. The summit comes to a close in a manner that is not expected by the Fathers of Nations. They set up a committee to bring the matter into conclusion. Initially, they were to sign into law Way Omega, one document, but then with the corruption of the process by introduction of Path Alpha, they have to vote. The committee is set and is given a name, Method Committee. This committee is given the mandate to decide the way forward that is going to be used to determine which document will be adopted. And this Method Committee is chaired by President Bengura, who seems to be terribly confused because of old age. He uses two ways to make a decision on which strategy is to be ratified or adopted into law. He chooses the simple matrix by a toss of a coin and a choice matrix. Ultimately, either way, the Path Alpha carries the day, meaning the common citizen wins. This is how decisions are made in Africa, decisions are not made through consultative processes. They are made through a shambolic way of voting. How can we just toss a coin and decide whether the heads or the tails is the way forward for Africa? This is an expose or revelation of how things are made or decisions are made in Africa. Thank you for taking your time to share with me. This was a peek into the plot or the structure of the story in Fathers of Nations. I've been your teacher, Robert Mutai. You can always write to me through eruditescholar2@gmail.com or brothermutai@gmail.com. And this is my contact. God bless you so much. Continue reading Fathers of Nations as we continue to analyze the story Fathers of Nations by Paul B. Vita. See you in the next class right on this channel.